The first time my daughter-in-law entered my apartment without permission, she said she was worried I might be dead. Her voice came from behind me while I was standing in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. I did not hear the door open. I did not hear footsteps. One moment I was alone with the hum of the old refrigerator, and the next she was there, smiling softly as if she belonged in the space more than I did. Her name was Evelyn. She had married my son Mark less than a year earlier and already spoke to me with the careful patience people reserve for children and the elderly. She said she had knocked. She said I must not have heard her. She said she found the door unlocked and panicked. She said a lot of things very quickly, as if speed could turn intrusion into kindness. I was 72 years old then, a widower living in a rent-stabilized apartment in the Riverside district, a neighborhood that used to be respectable before the grocery stores added security guards and the streetlights began flickering out one by one. I chose the place because it was quiet and because it required nothing from me. No explanations, no appearances, no expectations. Or so I thought. Evelyn moved through the apartment like someone doing an inspection. She wiped an already clean counter, straightened a stack of mail I had left deliberately crooked, and opened the fridge without asking. She made a show of concern, clucking softly when she saw leftovers labeled with dates. She asked if I was eating enough. She asked if I was sleeping well. She asked if I ever forgot to take my medication. When I asked how she got a key, she laughed lightly and said, "Mark must have given her one, just in case." That phrase, "just in case," stayed with me long after she left. It sounded harmless, but it carried weight. Just in case you fall. Just in case you forget. Just in case you cannot be trusted with your own life anymore. That night, I noticed the first thing out of place. A folder on my desk was turned the wrong way. I am particular about orientation. Habits like that do not fade quietly. They sharpen with age. I told myself it was nothing. The next morning, a drawer did not close the way it always had. The day after that, my bathroom cabinet smelled faintly of her perfume, vanilla layered over something sharp and synthetic. Evelyn returned 3 days later, then 2 days after that, always with a reason, always with concern, always when Mark was busy or unavailable. She never called ahead, she never asked, she simply appeared, letting herself in as if repetition could make it normal. I mentioned it to Mark over the phone the following Sunday. He laughed in the distracted way people do when they want a subject to go away. He said Evelyn was just helping. He said I should be grateful someone cared enough to check on me. He said, "You know how she worries, Dad." I knew exactly how she worried. She worried my drawers. She worried my paperwork. She worried the spaces where I kept things that mattered. The 7th time she entered without permission, I decided to test myself. I wrote down the date and time she arrived. I wrote down what she touched and how long she stayed. I did not do this out of paranoia. I did it because patterns are the only honest language left when words start lying. She stayed 23 minutes that afternoon. She went straight to the bedroom. She did not sit down. She did not make tea. She went to my nightstand, opened the top drawer, and closed it again. When I asked what she was looking for, she smiled and said she was checking if I still kept emergency numbers nearby. That was the moment something shifted. Care does not require rehearsal. It does not need excuses. It does not leave fingerprints on the places where your most private things are stored. When she left, she reminded me to lock the door. She said it twice, slowly, as if she were teaching me something new. That night, I stood in the middle of my apartment and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. It did not look unsafe. It did not look neglected. It looked like a space someone else had started to treat as temporary. I took out the notebook again and added one more line. 7th entry in 19 days. I had not yet called it what it was. I was still polite, even to myself. I still believed there was a misunderstanding waiting to be resolved. But as I closed the notebook, I felt something colder settle in my chest. Because care does not count how many times it enters uninvited. Control does. The first time I tried to explain what was happening, my son did not interrupt me. He waited until I finished and then sighed as if I had just confessed something embarrassing rather than alarming. We were sitting across from each other at a small cafe near his office. Mark kept glancing at his phone while I spoke, his fingers tapping the screen in short, impatient bursts. I told him Evelyn had been letting herself into my apartment again. I told him I had started keeping notes. I told him things were being moved and that I did not feel safe in my own home. He nodded slowly, the way doctors do when they are preparing to say something you will not like. He said, "Evelyn mentioned I seemed anxious lately." He said, "Stress can do strange things to memory." He said, "Maybe I should get a checkup just to be safe." I slid the notebook across the table toward him. I told him to read it. He did not open it. He pushed it back with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Dad, this is exactly what I am talking about," he said gently. "Writing things down like this, obsessing over details, it is not healthy." That word, obsessing, was the first stone in a wall I did not yet see being built. I asked him why Evelyn had a key. He said she worried about me. I asked him why she went through my bedroom drawers. He said she was checking on my medications. I asked him why she never came when he was around. He said maybe I only noticed it then. Every answer made me smaller. Every sentence took a little more of my certainty and handed it to her. 2 days later, Mark called and asked if I would mind meeting with a family therapist. He said it might help everyone communicate better. I asked who suggested it. He paused before saying, "Evelyn thought it could be good for all of us." That night, Evelyn came again. This time she did not smile. She walked in with a seriousness that felt rehearsed. She asked if I had scheduled my physical yet. She asked if I was still driving. She asked if I ever forgot where I parked. When I told her she needed to stop coming unannounced, her expression shifted into something almost pitying. She said, "Leonard, you do not remember telling me I could stop by any time. You were very clear about that." I knew I had not said it, but the way she said it made the room tilt slightly, as if maybe I had. Gaslighting does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives softly, dressed as concern repeating itself until your own thoughts feel untrustworthy. The real fracture came a week later when I received an envelope in the mail from a medical clinic I had never visited. Inside was an appointment confirmation for a cognitive assessment. The signature line listed Mark Hale as the emergency contact and Evelyn Hale as the initiating party. I drove to Mark's house that evening without calling first. He opened the door looking startled, then tired. Evelyn was behind him, already shaking her head as if she had expected this. She spoke first. She said she was sorry if the paperwork upset me. She said she was only thinking ahead. She said these things were easier to do early rather than later, when something bad happened. I asked Mark if he had signed the referral. He hesitated just long enough to tell me the truth without meaning to. He said Evelyn found a clinic. He said it was only an evaluation. He said it did not mean anything unless I failed. Failing was not a word I had ever associated with my mind until that moment. I raised my voice then, not shouting but firm. I told them I was not confused. I told them I balanced my accounts down to the cent and still read contracts for pleasure. I told them they had no right. Evelyn looked at Mark and sighed. She said, "See, this is what I mean. He gets emotional and defensive when we try to help." Mark would not meet my eyes. He said maybe we should take a step back. He said maybe I should consider that I am not seeing myself clearly anymore. That night I went home and opened the notebook again. I added a new section, not for times or dates but for language. Words they used, phrases repeated. Concern turned to management. Help turned to intervention. I slept poorly. When morning came, I found my front door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. The deadbolt was turned, but the chain hung loose, as if someone had opened it carefully and closed it again. On the kitchen table sat a brochure for assisted living communities. I stood there for a long time, staring at glossy pictures of smiling seniors playing cards in sunlit rooms. At the bottom, Evelyn had circled a sentence in blue ink. "Safe, supportive, supervised. That was when I understood the truth I had been avoiding. They were not worried about me. They were preparing to replace me. The thing she took was not valuable in any way that could be explained to a court or an insurance company. That was how I knew it was deliberate. I noticed it on a quiet Tuesday morning while putting on my coat. My hand reached into the small ceramic dish on the dresser where I kept loose change and one other object. The change was there. The object was not. It was my wedding ring. I had stopped wearing it years ago when my fingers began to swell in the winter, but I never put it away. It stayed in that dish where I could see it every day, a thin band of gold worn smooth on the inside from decades of habit. It had no stones, no engraving, nothing to mark it as special to anyone but me. I searched the apartment slowly, not frantically. I checked the dresser, the desk, the bathroom shelf. I lifted books and looked beneath papers. The ring did not reappear. I sat down on the edge of the bed and waited for the familiar doubt to creep in. Had I moved it myself? Had I put it somewhere else and forgotten? That doubt never came. The last time I remembered touching it was the night before Evelyn's most recent visit. She had gone into the bedroom then too. She had lingered by the dresser longer than usual. At the time, I had said nothing. I took out my phone and sent a single message. "Have you seen my ring? The one from the dresser?" The reply came quickly. "Which ring, Leonard? You had a lot of things lying around. Maybe you put it somewhere safe and forgot." Maybe you put it somewhere safe and forgot. It was a small sentence, but it landed hard. It carried the same implication as everything else she had been saying. You are losing track. You cannot trust your own memory. I did not respond. I waited. An hour later, another message arrived. "You know, this is why we worry. Losing personal items can be a sign. We should talk to Mark." That was the moment the line was crossed. Taking documents is theft. Taking control is abuse. But taking something meaningless except to its owner is psychological warfare. She had not taken the ring to sell it. She had taken it to watch what I would do without it. That evening Mark called. His tone was careful and measured, as if he were walking through a minefield. He said Evelyn told him I was very upset. He said she was concerned about my emotional stability. He asked if I remembered moving the ring myself. I told him plainly that Evelyn had taken it. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Dad, that is a serious accusation. Why would she do that?" I told him why. I told him she wanted to see me doubt myself. I told him she wanted evidence that I was confused. He did not argue. He did not agree. He said something worse. He said maybe it would be better if we waited before jumping to conclusions. Waiting was exactly what she wanted. Over the next week, small things continued to vanish and reappear. A letter from the bank showed up in the trash. Then it was back on the counter the next day. My spare glasses were gone for an afternoon, then returned to the drawer, with one lens smudged, as if to suggest careless handling. Each incident came with a comment. "You really should organize better. You should write things down. This is not normal, Leonard." I wrote everything down. Then something else began to bother me. The timing. Every incident coincided with Evelyn's overnight shifts at the hospital, where she worked as a scheduling coordinator. Shifts, she claimed, kept her busy, but somehow always allowed her to stop by my apartment late at night or early in the morning. I checked her schedule online. It was publicly accessible. The nights my things moved were the nights she was listed as off-duty. That was when suspicion hardened into certainty. One afternoon, I opened the front door to find the ring back in its dish. No note, no explanation. It had simply returned. I stood there holding it between my fingers, feeling the weight of it. The message was clear. I can take things. I can give them back. I decide what is real. I placed the ring in my pocket and did not put it back. That night, I sat at the small folding table I used as a desk and reviewed my notes. Dates, times, movements, words. The pattern was no longer subtle. It was methodical. Evelyn was not acting alone. She was testing how far she could go without resistance. She was seeing what she could erase without consequence. I realized then that confronting her again would only give her what she wanted. an emotional reaction, a scene, a story to tell Mark and anyone else who would listen. So I stopped reacting. I smiled when she came by. I thanked her for her concern. I pretended not to notice when she went into the bedroom. And while she thought she was proving I was unraveling, I began doing something she never expected. I started preparing. I did not install the camera because I wanted revenge. I installed it because I wanted certainty. There is a difference between suspicion and proof, and I had spent my entire life knowing which one mattered when things went wrong. I chose a device small enough to disappear into the room without changing its shape. It looked like part of the smoke detector housing above the bookshelf. Anyone who glanced at it would see nothing unusual. Anyone who moved with intent would never think to look up. I installed it on a Thursday afternoon and tested the feed that night. The angle was wide enough to see the desk, the bedroom doorway, and the small section of wall where I kept my files. I did not watch it immediately. I wanted to see what happened when I was not hovering over the evidence. The first recording came at 1:42 a.m. Evelyn entered without turning on the lights. She did not call my name. She did not check the bedroom. She moved directly to the desk. There was no concern in her body language, no hesitation, no searching for signs of distress. She knew exactly what she was there for. She opened the top drawer and removed a folder labeled Insurance Correspondence. She flipped through it quickly, then placed it back. She opened the second drawer and took out my checkbook. She photographed the cover, then the pages. She did not steal it, she documented it. I watched her movements, frame by frame, the next morning. The precision, the calm. This was not a woman improvising. This was a woman following a checklist. She went into the bedroom and opened the nightstand. She took out my pill organizer, shook it once, then put it back. She smiled when she did it. A small, satisfied smile, as if she were confirming something. Then she did something that made my hands go cold. She opened the file box I kept under the bed. It was locked, but not tightly. She had found the spare key weeks earlier during one of her helpful visits. Inside were old tax summaries, medical statements, and a copy of my identification documents. She photographed everything, front and back, slowly, thoroughly. She lingered on my social security card. When I paused the video on that frame, I understood the truth I had been circling for weeks. This was not about care. This was not even about control. This was about erasure. Identity theft does not begin with money. It begins with access. Over the next 3 nights, the recordings continued. Each visit followed the same pattern. She never took cash. She never took anything that could be reported missing immediately. She copied. She catalogued. She created a shadow version of my life that she could use whenever she needed to replace me. On the 4th night, she made a phone call while standing in my living room. The camera did not capture audio clearly, but I recognized the cadence. She was speaking to someone she needed to convince. The next day, I received a call from a clinic asking to confirm symptoms I had never reported. Memory lapses, disorientation, mood swings. The woman on the phone sounded apologetic, as if she already felt sorry for me. Evelyn had not only been entering my apartment, she had been entering my medical record. I realized then how close I was to losing everything. A diagnosis does not need to be accurate to be effective. Once the idea of incompetence exists, it spreads faster than truth. Mark called that evening. He said a doctor wanted to speak with me. He said it was routine. He said Evelyn was just trying to help coordinate things. I asked him if he believed I was unwell. He did not answer directly. He said he just wanted what was best for everyone. That was the sentence that confirmed it. Everyone. Not me. That night I sat alone watching the footage again. I saw Evelyn standing in my home, treating it like a resource to be harvested. I saw how comfortable she was, touching my life as if it already belonged to her. I also saw something else. A mistake. On the last recording, she glanced up for just a second. Not at the camera exactly, but at the ceiling. Something in her posture changed. She hesitated. Then she continued. She had felt watched. That meant time was limited. I backed up the files to 3 separate drives. I labeled them carefully. I documented timestamps and cross-referenced them with her schedule. I did not tell Mark. I did not confront Evelyn. I waited. Because once someone realizes they are close to being caught, they do not retreat. They accelerate. And I knew then that whatever she was planning was about to move from preparation to execution. People see what they expect to see, and Evelyn expected to see a weak, old man clinging to routine because routine was all he had left. I let her believe it because underestimation is a kind of camouflage. The truth was simpler and far less visible. I had spent 35 years as a compliance risk consultant for pension funds and endowments. My job had never been to catch criminals in the act. It had been to recognize behavior that preceded collapse and to act before damage became irreversible. I retired quietly, and I did it on my own terms. I did not downsize because I had to. I chose an apartment that required nothing from me because I wanted to see who would still show up when there was nothing obvious to take. Evelyn showed up.
What she never bothered to learn was that simplicity does not equal poverty, and age does not erase pattern recognition. I owned assets through layered trusts that did not list my name anywhere obvious. I received income that arrived like clockwork and left just as quietly. I paid my bills with checks because it made people comfortable. People relax when they think you are predictable. After watching the footage again, I pulled my credit report. It showed several soft inquiries I did not authorize, not enough to trigger alerts, just enough to test the perimeter. I ran Mark's credit too. That took longer because I had not looked in years. The results explained everything. Mark and Evelyn were drowning. Credit cards near their limits. A personal loan in default. 2 missed rent payments on their townhouse. A denied refinancing application less than a month earlier. Desperation leaves fingerprints even when people think they are hiding. They were not planning for my future. They were planning for theirs. That night I opened a new notebook, not the one Evelyn had seen. This one stayed with me. I mapped out timelines and motivations, their debt curve against the escalation of her visits, the medical appointment scheduled just after their refinancing failed, the increased urgency in her tone once money became scarce. She had not chosen me because I was old. She had chosen me because I was accessible. Once I saw it clearly, the fear receded. Fear only survives confusion. Clarity replaces it with focus. I considered my options. I could confront them with the footage. I could threaten legal action. I could change the locks and disappear. All of those would stop the behavior temporarily. None of them would stop the narrative they were already building. If I accused her, she would cry. If I showed Mark the evidence, he would say it was a misunderstanding. If I ran, she would tell the story of the confused father who fled when faced with help. I needed something else. I needed consequences that did not depend on belief. The mistake most people make when they feel betrayed is assuming exposure is enough. Exposure is noise. Accountability is structure. I did not want them embarrassed. I wanted them contained. That required patience. I began changing small things that Evelyn would notice. I left a manila envelope labeled estate planning on the desk. I moved my bank mail from the locked drawer to an open shelf. I made a phone call within earshot of the front door about liquid assets and timing. The performance was subtle, not a lie, just selective truth framed to be overheard. Evelyn's visits increased. She stayed longer. She touched more. She grew bolder. Mark called and asked if I was planning to move. He said Evelyn thought it might be good for me to be closer to family. I said I was considering my options. I let my voice trail off as if weighed down by decision. That night, Evelyn returned after midnight. She did not know I was awake. I watched her through the camera as she stood in the living room, reading the labels on my folders with an intensity that bordered on hunger. That was when I knew the next phase had begun. People who think they are close to winning stop being careful. They rush. They rationalize. They start believing the outcome is inevitable. I packed a small bag and placed it in the closet where she would see it if she looked. I left a note on the counter with a phone number she did not recognize, and the words, "Need to finalize this soon." Then I did the most important thing. I stopped being present. I delayed responses. I missed calls. I let concern turn into irritation on their side. When Mark finally reached me, I told him I needed time alone. I told him I was tired of being managed. I told him I might leave the city for a while. He did not argue. He did not ask where. That silence told me everything. I was no longer a father to protect. I was an obstacle about to remove itself, and that meant Evelyn would not wait much longer. I did not announce my departure, because announcements invite questions, and questions invite witnesses. Instead, I began to erase myself, the way people do when they no longer wish to be found, but are not yet ready to be declared gone. The first thing I did was change how the apartment existed on paper. Quietly, legally, through channels Evelyn would never think to check. The lease designation shifted from private residence to restricted document storage, under a holding structure whose name meant nothing to her. No familiar words, no emotional hooks, just compliance language, dense enough to repel casual curiosity. Then I moved. Not dramatically, not all at once. A box here, a suitcase there. I took only what mattered. Clothes, personal papers, the notebook that told the truth. Everything else stayed exactly where it was, so nothing would look abandoned. Abandonment suggests vulnerability. I wanted absence to suggest delay. I stayed one night elsewhere and let my phone go unanswered. The next day, I returned briefly and made sure the camera caught me pacing slowly across the living room, as if distracted. I let Evelyn see the bag in the closet. I let her see the stack of folders on the desk. That evening, I sent Mark a message. Just a few lines. "I need space. The city is too loud. I might be gone for a while. Do not worry." He replied hours later with a single sentence. "Okay, take care." He did not ask where I was going. He did not ask when I would return. He did not offer to help. That was not concern. That was relief. The next step required precision. I brought in a heavy steel safe through the service entrance early in the morning when the hallway cameras were on maintenance cycle. It was old and ugly and impossible to ignore. The kind of object that announces importance without explaining why. I placed it in the center of the living room and bolted it to the floor. Inside, I put nothing of value, only weight, paper, density, enough to convince someone it was full, enough to make effort feel justified. I posted signs that would only be visible once someone was already inside. Restricted access, authorized personnel only. Legal language that meant nothing to someone who believed rules were flexible. Then I left the apartment for the last time and locked the door behind me. I did not leave the key. I wanted a choice to be made. That night Evelyn came. The camera captured her standing outside the door longer than usual. She tried the handle. She frowned. She stepped back and looked at the frame. The next morning Mark called. His voice was strained. He said Evelyn tried to check on me and could not get in. He said she was worried something had happened. I told him calmly that I had moved some things around. I said I was sorting papers. I said I needed privacy. He hesitated, then said, maybe Evelyn should hold on to the key in case of emergency. I told him I had changed the locks. There was a long silence. Then he said, okay. That was when I knew they believed I was gone. Not physically, strategically. Evelyn returned that evening, and again the next. She paced the hallway. She peered under the door. She made calls from the stairwell. Her patience had thinned. On the third night, I made my final move. I stood inside the apartment for less than 10 minutes. Long enough to be heard. Long enough to be overheard. I spoke loudly on the phone to no one about moving assets out of accounts and keeping things off the grid. I mentioned cash. I mentioned timing. I mentioned trust. Then I left. From that moment on, I did not return. Evelyn stopped pretending to worry. The next recording showed her outside the door, with her ear pressed to the wood, listening not for breath but for opportunity. When someone believes you are vulnerable, they test boundaries. When they believe you are leaving,
They stop testing and start taking. The trap was no longer theoretical. It was active. Greed does not arrive loudly. It waits until it believes no one is watching, and then it stops pretending to be anything else. They came back just after midnight. The hallway camera caught them stepping out of the stairwell instead of the elevator. Evelyn moved first. Mark followed half a step behind, carrying a canvas bag that hung heavy against his leg. They had chosen the hour carefully. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people feel invisible. Evelyn did not knock. She did not hesitate. Showing hesitation would mean doubt, and doubt was something she had already convinced herself she no longer needed. She crouched near the lock and tested it once more. When it did not turn, her mouth tightened into a thin line of irritation. Mark shifted his weight. He whispered something I could not hear, but I knew the shape of the question. "Are we really doing this?" Evelyn did not answer him. She reached into the bag and pulled out a pry bar wrapped in cloth. The metal caught the hallway light, and for a moment she froze, staring at it, as if acknowledging the point of no return. Then she wedged it into the doorframe and leaned her full weight forward. The sound was sharp and final. Wood splintering has a voice. It does not scream. It snaps. Mark flinched. He stepped back instinctively as if distance might absolve him. Evelyn pulled again, harder this time. The frame cracked, and the door gave way enough to allow entry. They stood there breathing fast, listening for movement. There was none. The apartment welcomed them with silence. Inside, the lights stayed off. Their flashlights swept across empty walls, bare furniture, and finally settled on the safe. It sat exactly where I had left it, massive and deliberate, inhibiting the room like a monument. Evelyn let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. She moved toward it with reverence, touching the surface as if confirming it was real. Mark spoke then. His voice was thin. "There are signs on it." He shined his light on the warning labels. He read the words slowly. "Restricted access. Authorized personnel only." She tore the sign off without looking. "They always do this," she said. "Big words to scare people. He wanted us to see this." She handed Mark the drill. He hesitated. The delay was brief, but it mattered. It was the last moment he could have chosen differently. "Do it," she said quietly. The drill whined to life, filling the room with a mechanical scream that drowned out thought. She pressed it into the steel near the lock, sparks jumping as metal resisted. That was when the silent alarm triggered. There was no sound in the apartment, no warning, no flashing lights, just a signal sent into a system that did not sleep. Outside in the stairwell, officers were already moving. They had been waiting. Inside, Evelyn drilled harder, sweat streaking down her face, urgency replacing caution. She did not see Mark step back. He was scanning the room now, noticing the emptiness, the absence, the way nothing personal remained. "Something is wrong," he said. She did not hear him, or she chose not to. The lights came on all at once, flooding the room with harsh white brightness. Evelyn screamed, dropping the drill as it skittered across the floor. Police voices filled the space, commanding, urgent, impossible to ignore. "Get on the ground! Drop the weapon! Hands where we can see them!" Evelyn turned, wild confusion flashing across her face as officers poured through the broken doorway. One pointed a weapon, steady and calm. Another kicked the pry bar out of reach. Mark fell to his knees immediately. His hands went to his head. He did not argue. He did not resist. He looked relieved. Evelyn did not. She shouted about misunderstandings, about family, about permission. She tried to explain herself while being forced face down onto the floor, wrists bound behind her back. The officers read the charges aloud. Breaking and entering. Possession of burglary tools. Attempted theft from a secured facility. The words hit her in waves. Facility. Attempted. Felony. Mark was lifted to his feet and escorted out first. His face was grey. He did not look back. Evelyn struggled as they dragged her through the doorway. She screamed my name, then stopped when she realized I was not there to answer. From where I watched, the room was empty again, except for splintered wood and the safe untouched by greed. The plan had worked not because it was cruel, but because it was inevitable. People who believe they deserve what they want always convince themselves the rules do not apply, and rules exist precisely for people like that. The silence after the arrest was different from the silence before it. Before it had been tense, uncertain, waiting for something to break. After, it was clean. I returned to the apartment the next morning, accompanied by an officer who treated me with a level of respect Evelyn never had. The doorframe was splintered, the lock hung crooked, useless now that it had served its purpose. The safe sat, untouched, exactly where I left it. Nothing had been taken, everything had been revealed. At the station, Evelyn cried. Not for me, not for what she had done, but for what she had lost. The story she had been writing for months collapsed in a single night. There was no confused old man to manage, no inheritance to accelerate, no narrative where she was the hero, saving a failing patriarch from himself. There was only evidence, the footage, the documents, the pattern. Elder abuse is not loud when it begins, but the law treats it harshly when it ends. The charges did not disappear just because she said family. They multiplied. Identity theft, attempted coercion, unlawful entry, conspiracy. Words she had never imagined would be used in the same sentence as her name. Mark sat in the corner during the initial hearing, staring at the floor. When he finally looked up, his eyes were empty, not angry, not defiant, just hollow. He did not speak in her defense. He did not speak at all. Later, he asked me why I did not stop it sooner. I told him the truth, because you would not have believed me. He nodded once. He knew that was true. The court issued a protective order barring Evelyn from contacting me or entering any property associated with my name. She signed it with shaking hands. Her confidence evaporated the moment she realized control only works when the other person doubts themselves. Mark lost more than a wife that day. He lost the illusion that standing still was the same as staying neutral. Silence had been his choice, and silence had consequences. I did not yell at him. I did not lecture. I told him that trust once broken does not regenerate just because time passes. It requires work and distance and humility. I told him he would need to build his life without expecting me to soften the ground beneath him. He did not argue. When everything was finished, I returned to a place Evelyn had never seen. Not the apartment, not the safe, not the decoy life. A quiet residence where my name was not on the door, and no one expected anything from me except honesty. I placed my wedding ring on the table beside the bed. It felt heavier now, not because of loss, but because it had survived being used as a weapon. Peace does not arrive with celebration. It arrives when the noise finally stops. I was not lonely. I was intact. For the first time in months, I slept without listening for footsteps. I woke without checking drawers. I breathed without rehearsing explanations. Some people will say what I did was cold. That family deserves forgiveness. That age should bring softness, not boundaries. I learned something different. Calling someone weak is often the last mistake a manipulator makes, because weakness is what predators hope for, not what they find when they push too far. I did not destroy my family. I refused to let myself be erased from it, and that choice cost me people who were never really on my side. But it gave me back something far more valuable. My name, my agency, my life. 5 lessons from this story. First, family does not grant permission to violate boundaries. Second, concern that ignores consent is control in disguise. Third, age attracts predators only when silence protects them. Fourth, evidence matters more than explanations. Fifth, self-respect is not cruelty, it is survival. I learned that protecting yourself is not the opposite of love. It is the line that tells others how to love you correctly. If this story made you think, like, share and comment, what lesson did you take from this story? And what city are you watching from?